College attendance has continued to rise over the past few decades. The biggest question, though, is how do we afford this steadily rising costs? So get your lunch boxes and grab your calculator because this episode, we're getting schooled on education funding options that will set you and your family up for success. I'm your host, Jordan Harrison.
And I'm your host, John Harrison.
And this is
Money Unwrapped.
Today, we're going to be talking about all things education funding and how it can help set you and your family up for success. The education funding opportunities we're going to discuss can be applied to your family, your future family, or even your future self. Now, obviously, I'm 25. I don't have a family yet. I'm not even really thinking about it that much. But it is still important, even for me, to be thinking about education funding since I want a family in the future and also playing with the idea of grad school. So we thought that this episode could be super relevant to everyone, no matter what stage of life that they're in. Studies show that 25% of baby boomers have earned their bachelor's degree, and that continues to steadily rise. Gen X is at 29%, millennials 39%, and approximately 50% of Gen Zers have earned or are on track to earn their bachelor's degree. And that statistic is going to be even higher for Gen Alpha, which surveys indicate that 75% intend to pursue college or vocational training or some form of higher learning. So we see that people's interest in college and their attendance in college is steadily rising, but so are the costs. And I think it's really important to talk about how educational savings plans can help you facilitate this very expensive endeavor.
Well, from those statistics, Jordan, it seems like your generation and the generation after you, everybody's going to college.
That's kind of what it feels like. Even in everyday practice, I'm kind of shocked that the statistic wasn't higher. I mean, almost every single Gen Zer that I meet has gone to college. That's almost one of the first questions you ask.
But how many of those are actually in the labor force, are actually working in a career that they went to college for?
You know, I actually have a statistic on that. I'm so glad you asked. So according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, data indicates that approximately 69% of Gen Z that held bachelor's degrees or higher are employed. And then there's another 25% of those people with bachelor's degrees that are pursuing further education. So that basically means that 94% of people in Gen Z who held degrees are either employed or pursuing higher education.
Wow. So, there's a lot of debate going on right now, whether it makes sense to go to college. Again, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Social Security Administration, if you have just a high school diploma, the average lifetime earnings is about $1.6 million.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't seem very high when you consider that you get out of high school at 18. If you retire at 65, that's 47 years.
What's that math? 1.6 divided by 47.
It's like $30,000 a year. But somebody that has a bachelor's degree on average will earn about $2.8 million. So, there's definitely a difference in the amount of money that you can earn if you have a college degree. But this is a really telling statistic, is that in 2026, early 2026, when the unemployment rates came out, high school grads are unemployed at a 6.4% rate, whereas college grads, if you have a college diploma, only about 2.8% of those people are unemployed.
Wow. So just looking at that statistic, it appears as though it will be easier to get a job with a college degree.
It appears that way.
It appears that way. But, with that statistic that you were talking about with lifetime earnings, I would be really interested to see what their debt ratio is. Because as we know, college is very expensive. And when you're walking out of school for either a higher education like med school or a grad program, or just with a bachelor's degree, some people have six-figure debt coming out.
like you have a really good friend that you grew up with. She's in medical school right now. What's her debt situation going to look like when she gets out of med school?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even want to know. And with the doctor thing, it's even more complicated because doctors are not so happy because hospitals are getting more of the money that doctors used to get. So they're being paid even less. And yet the cost of medical school training is just steadily increasing. And, also with doctors, she goes to medical school for 4 years. Well, let me backtrack. She goes to bachelor's, her undergrad, for 4 years. She does medical school for 4 years. So we're at 8 years right there. Then she has at least 2 years of residency where she's making barely any money and has a crazy schedule. So now we're at 10 years. And then she has 1 more year of usually a fellowship. And then finally in that 12th year is when she'll start making, quote unquote, the big bucks.
So she's not even going to start making money till she's 30 years old.
Yeah, if not higher.
Well, that's what's really interesting is that adjusted for inflation, the average cost of tuition at a public 4-year university, like the great University of Kansas, is about 40 times higher than it was in 1963.
40? 40?
40.
Wow. I mean, that's just jaw-dropping to hear.
Well, I know for me personally, when I went to KU, it was $1,200 a semester for up to 18 hours, not 1,800 hours.
That's a good deal.
I know, that would have been great. But when you went to LSU, it was $44,000 a year.
Yeah, I mean, and that's before scholarships and that's out of
Correct.
state. But I would love to see those numbers now because, I bet they're even higher. And that was at a public school,
Right.
like you said.
4-year university.
4-year university. It wasn't like I was going to Harvard or Duke, right? Super private, more exclusive. I just think it's crazy. It is so insane to me.
Well, in the 21st century, the cost of college has increased 41.7% faster than the cost of inflation. I mean, the average tuition inflation rate is about 3.91% compared to total inflation rate of 2.56.
And you know what's crazy about that to me? Inflation is such a hot button topic right now. The whole world is concerned with our inflation rate, with the US's inflation rate, and no one is even talking about that college is increasing, you said 41.7% faster?
Yep.
I mean, shouldn't this be what we're talking about? This is impacting our youth and our future.
Absolutely, because knowledge is power, and the way that you get knowledge is through education, whether you self-educate yourself or you go to college. And, there's a big debate right now whether college is even worth it. But I think it also depends on what your career field is. Like if you're a young entrepreneur and you go to a trade school, you can get a skill like in HVAC or electrical, and you can have your own company and really do well for yourself. Because the one thing that we've learned over the last 50 years is the trades have kind of been falling to the wayside.
Right. I mean, just going back to the question of, is college really worth it? I think that something that's always been mind-boggling to me too is that you graduate high school at 17, 18,
Yep.
sometimes 19. And then you're faced with this decision, if you decide to go to college, of what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And it is such a daunting question to ask someone whose frontal lobe is not even close to being developed at 18, 19 years old, and to say, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?
When I was younger and starting college, looking back on it now that I could reflect, it probably would have made sense for me to take a quote unquote gap year to really decide what I wanted to do versus just jumping in. But we've all been conditioned that you go from high school straight to college, and then some people will go to grad school, and then a large majority of people will get into the real world. And it's interesting because people are hopping from job to job now. And so it comes back to that age-old question, was college really worth it?
Well, honestly, a lot of my friends right now, they are having kind of these existential crises of, okay, I hate the career field that I'm in. This is what I went to school for, but yet college is so expensive and it takes so much time. And, they've been out in the real world for a while. And so they're used to that income. So to uproot their lives and go back to school is this huge, difficult decision, right? But they're unhappy. But now it's like, okay, so I'm going to have to do part-time grad school, part-time work. I'm going to have to pay for grad school. I'm going to have to basically go into new jobs at an entry level because all my experience doesn't have anything to do with what I actually want to do. And I feel like it's so difficult when we give these 18-year-olds, say, choose what you want to do for the rest of your life, go spend thousands of dollars on a college degree. But hey, here's the trick,
it's not thousands. It's tens of thousands.
Well, yeah.
And to your point, how many of those people that are in their job and they're unhappy and they go to grad school, how many of them already have college debt? And then you add on grad school, it just exacerbates their debt.
Well, yeah. And the trick is you could go to grad school and still either not be happy and have that degree, your first degree and your second degree, not be anything related to what you want to do, and also not be applied to what you want to do. So like I got a general degree. I did business, entrepreneurship, and women and gender studies because I knew that those were my three main interests, that I would never want to be an engineer or something like that. So those are general enough and broad enough to open me up to a lot of different jobs, right?
Correct.
But now I'm in finance and I don't have a finance degree. And a lot of large companies would be upset with that. And they would want me to go back to school to get a specific finance degree.
Right. They'd want you to get an MBA.
Right.
College is great because it's really a coming of age. It teaches you how to, for most people, live on their own. To a previous episode, we talked about budgeting, how to budget. It also allows them to gain the freedom to see what they're really interested in. For most of us, K through 12, it's just a set schedule, set classes. But when you get to college, yes, you have your prereqs, but you also have your electives where, like for your degree was in business, but then you had two minors, entrepreneurship and women and gender studies. So it allowed you to explore things that you were really interested in. And what I think college to me is it gives you a broad base of knowledge so that when you get into the real world, you've got that broad base. And you may not end up being in whatever your particular field is, but it gives you a broad base so that you can go into different fields, but you have this base of knowledge that can help you learn. And as you know, I've talked about, all college does is it's what I would call a ticket punch to get you into a job.
Yeah. According to a 2025 Sallie Mae survey, most undergraduate students rely on their parents' income or savings to pay for college.
Really? Thank God that we didn't have that.
But when you're talking about these very expensive degrees and how college is such a difficult decision and it's a big financial responsibility, to hear that most students are almost pawning that off to their parents is also kind of mind-boggling.
Well, I remember, first of all, you got scholarships to LSU, so that took about half of it off the table.
Woohoo.
And yes. And then we had a 529, and then I knew that I was going to cash flow whatever we had to cash flow. But I'll never forget after you were out in the real world and had graduated, and you talked about how you were so thankful that you didn't have any college debt.
Yes.
Because a lot of your friends were burdened with college debt.
Oh, yeah. And it was like, it's the first thing on your mind. When you leave college, you almost feel like you're entering this new phase of life, which you are. And to have the burden of these huge sums of debt waiting on you before you've even worked a day, really, before you've had a steady income is sometimes just so overwhelming. So I'm incredibly grateful. And also a lot of people don't have that option. And it's almost become parents paying for college twice. Because in my mind, right, you paid for your own college.
Right.
And then you paid for mine.
Yep.
And I mean, you also paid for other people's college. So you've
That
paid
is
for
correct.
college. You've paid for college a few times in your life. But that's kind of become the new norm. And it wasn't originally. You know, your parents didn't help you with college.
No.
I would say, I don't have a statistic on this, so don't hold me to this, but I would say most people your age had to pay their way through college.
I would agree with that. And, you know, there's lots of different ways to pay for college that we did not have. For example, when I was in high school, AP classes had just started.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I took 4 of them my senior year, which was great because I went into college with like 16 hours.
I love that.
Yeah, it was great because then that way you don't have to, you know, that's basically a semester. So, you know, a way that people can start kind of saving for college or curbing their costs is have their child take AP classes or take some classes at the community college, get some of those prereqs out. Now, the caveat to that is you got to make sure that those hours will transfer to whatever school you're going to.
Right, because otherwise it's a waste of time for everyone.
Correct.
But I do have a lot of friends who started at a community college for 2 years just so that they could live at home, they could save money on rent, they could save money on school, and then they went to their university and had their college experience.
Right. And, you know, that's a great way to kind of, if resources are limited, to kind of curb that spending is to have you go to a community college, get some hours out of the way.
Definitely. I mean, it also is hard, though, because like you said earlier, we are so conditioned to go straight from high school into college. So people are almost yearning for that experience.
Yep.
So it's hard to make a disciplined choice and say, okay, this isn't worth it yet. But I think that the takeaway is just that planning for education costs is a relevant and prudent part of planning for your financial future. And honestly, now it's a personal decision, yes, but it's also a family decision when your parents are contributing. And also, it is partly a decision for your future family, too. You know, since it is now a family decision as well as personal, I think that there's a lot of different factors that you can consider when you're choosing a school. So you can choose between a public or a private school. And there's actually a statistic that says that public college is actually 75% less than the average price of a private college, about $11,000 versus $44,000.
That is an incredible statistic.
It is. And I wonder if the quality of education is different. That's a whole different thing. But I do wonder if the price makes a difference. I mean, I went to a public university, as did you.
Correct.
So I think it's something to definitely consider. But also, college has now become such a cultural fit idea as well. So when I was touring, you know, we toured public and private schools, and we just found the one that was a culture fit. It didn't really matter to me if it was private or public. It mattered to me how I felt in the space and how the culture was and if I could see myself there. So definitely carefully choosing which school you go to is super important, as well as factoring in the cost of living. So if you go to school in DC, well, your monthly cost is going to be a lot higher than if you go to school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where average rent is like $800. And then also when you're considering schools and making a informed decision on what school you want to go to, look at scholarships and grants. And then, of course, there's the big one, which is financial aid. But the even bigger one than FAFSA that kind of goes hand in hand is student loans.
Oh, yeah. Student loans. That is your generation's biggest impediment to being debt free.
Yeah.
In fact, student loan debt is the second highest consumer debt category after mortgages.
Wow.
So you think about somebody who's wanting to buy a house and then they have student loan debt. How are they ever supposed to get financially free?
It is just insane. And then trying to adjust to their new form of life and their new schedule. You know, like you said, college is the first time you have freedom, and then you go to the real world and you kind of have none again.
Right.
It's such a difficult time of life, that transition, that to have overwhelming student debt it just compounds the difficulty of that time.
Right. And, the thing is, you've got to look at, as a parent, what are the ways I can take some of that burden off of my child, the different ways you can save for education. Now, we've talked about ways you can cut the costs by doing AP classes, starting in a community college, then going to school. But one of the best ways to save for education is a 529 plan, because the great thing about 529s is, depending on the state, you can get a state tax deduction. Once the money goes into the 529, you can invest it either conservatively, moderately, aggressively, but it grows tax-free from that point forward. And then when you have your child go to college, you can take that money out and use it for college expenses, so it comes out tax-free. They made some changes a few years ago where you can even use it for private high schools, which is really great. And 529s are a great tool. The only downside really to 529s is if you don't use them for school or school-related expenses, there could be some tax consequence. But I know you've talked to clients about they could convert them to a Roth.
Yes.
So why don't you explain how that works?
Yeah, so I actually had a client ask me to convert his daughter's 529 to a Roth because she had decided that she didn't actually want to pursue graduate school. So she had already done her bachelor's, but the 529, like you mentioned earlier, was overfunded. So they were looking for ways to use it. And the issue we ran into with her is that in order to qualify for that Roth conversion, she had to be employed. She had to have a steady stream of income, which she did not have. She was going to just kind of chill and live off of her parents for a little while. And so we couldn't convert it. But that's such a great option when you have an overfunded 529. It's almost like, okay, if I don't use all of this on school, now I'm going to save for this next part of my life, which is retirement and my Roth, and you still get those tax benefits.
Well, and another nice thing about the 529 is you have complete control. You can change the ownership. So like when I had yours, if something would have happened to me, there would have been a successor owner, which would have been you, and then you can change the beneficiary too. So what a lot of clients will do is if they have an overfunded 529, they'll make it an educational legacy where they know their daughter Elena is going to have children. So they'll make Elena the owner, and then they'll make Elena's children, Stephen and Brian, the beneficiaries. And it's a way to create an educational legacy.
Well, what if Elena didn't have kids? I mean, what could you do with your 529 then?
Well, she could put her sister, Kylie, on there as the beneficiary.
Oh, see, that's another great bonus, so that if you don't have kids, you can still move it to someone in the family once.
Correct.
So, I mean, there's a lot of benefits with 529s. Obviously, they're not suitable for everyone, but they are a very exciting multi-purpose tool when it comes to education funding.
They're a great tool. I mean, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think you can even use it now for vocational schools, trade schools. 529s are great. And, the earlier you start them, the better.
I mean, I want to think about someone like me who's 25. You're not married. You're not thinking about having kids yet, but that, at least for me personally, I want kids eventually. So I guess I'm thinking about maybe putting away a little bit of money because over the course of time, it just grows. So if I was to put away $50 a month, for example, I mean, in 18 years, that could be
a lot of money.
A lot of money.
And it's good to start earlier. Like, you want to have children. So by starting earlier, you're building the nest egg, a tax-free nest egg for education. But what's the downside? Well, the downside is you could have this big pool of money. You end up not having kids. So
Right.
Then what? Well, you could either choose to go to school.
Which I probably wouldn't at that moment.
Probably not. Maybe you'd go to grad school. But let's just say you don't do any of that.
Right.
You could convert it to Roth. Yes, you'd have to pay some taxes. So it's just another tool to help you save. I have a good friend. He puts money in his daughter's 529s, But then his parents also put money in their 529s. So we have a client, and he has 4 grandchildren, and for their birthdays and special occasions, he just puts money into their 529.
See, I love that because I do feel like my generation is starting to creep into this idea of it takes a village once again, and that we kind of look at our lives and children and the idea of having a family as a big family affair. You know, I feel like generations before it became very segmented, like your family is your family and it's your responsibility. And now, just like that client, you know, we want grandparents involved. We want that community.
Right.
Which obviously is, once again, a privilege that not everyone has. But it's very nice to see when it does happen and it does work out.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, no matter what you put in the 529, it's going to help.
Wow. So, I mean, just going back to that $50 a month example, if we just started saving for 18 years or that client put $50 a month away, it's $24,000.
Right. And think about this. That's $600 a year, right? But you get, depending on your state, a state tax deduction. So that's a win. It grows tax-free. That's a win. Then as long as it's used for school or school-related expenses, it comes out tax-free. That's another win.
Right. And that $24,000 is with an estimated 8% rate of return as well.
Right. Exactly. So you think about it, it's just a win-win-win-win.
I just think that the main idea of this episode is that college is a big choice. And going to college is a big choice. If it's worth it is up for debate, honestly, and it's very subjective and it's personal. And I think that as long as you keep in mind that education funding has potential to be one of the most significant expenses for you and your family, as long as you have that awareness and you know that this has potential to be a very significant expense, you then can create a plan to mitigate and meet these expenses and be able to create a more informed decision on how you want to approach it.
Oh, I agree 100%. You know, the bottom line is whatever you do, and no matter what amount you put in, over time, that's going to benefit you.
Right.
When you're saying, you know, does it make sense to even start with a little bit? I would always say absolutely, because that 529, even if it's a little bit, the $50 a month at 18 years at an 8% rate of return grows to $24,000. That's $24,000 that you don't have to get a student loan on.
Right.
Remember, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
I've never heard that before.
So, I mean, just a little bit of prevention will save you down the road. And as we've talked about, there's lots of different ways to save for college. We just highlighted the 529 because that's the one, to me, that makes the most sense, because you can really turbocharge those and build up this big tax-free pool of money. And if you start it early enough, when your child goes to LSU or KU, the money's there and they don't have to take out student loans, which then burdens them down the road.
You know, as you say, taking one bite of the apple can be better than trying to tackle it all at once or making no progress at all. A little bit goes a long way most of the time.
That's right.
As we've said, education funding has the potential to be one of the most significant expenses for you and your family over the course of your lifetime. And so that's why it's important to have a plan to mitigate and meet these expenses so that you can potentially set your family on a path of less debt and more education.
And just remember, we're here as a resource for your friends, your family, your colleagues, your coworkers, to help them navigate college funding. So if they have any questions or concerns, they can email us at podcast@mymoneyunwrapped.com, or they can feel free to call us at the office at 913-827-4588, because as always, we're here to help. I am John Harrison, your co-host.
And I'm Jordan Harrison.
And this has been Money Unwrapped.
Securities offered through Silver Oak Securities, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory services offered through Elevation Advisory Partners, LLC, a SEC-registered investment advisor. Harrison Capital Management, Silver Oak Securities, and Elevation Advisory Partners are separate entities. This content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as investment, tax, or legal advice. The views expressed are general in nature and may not be appropriate for all individuals. Listeners should consult with a qualified financial professional before making any financial decisions. Past performance and examples discussed, if any, are not indicative of future results.